am not sure how many of you have noticed this, but there is a certain habit in the video games industry, especially or mostly in the area of the bigger studios, the bigger brands, and the bigger franchises, that of never actually keeping the story in the games. Back in the olden days, this was actually something that needed to be done, otherwise there would be no story. You couldn't really fit all that text, all those descriptions in the games. That's why you have to read Wasteland's manual when the game tells you to. And the manual is filled with all sorts of red herrings and fake leads, just so you wouldn't be able to read the manual alone and figure out the story. Ultima 4 has something similar where the game asks you at the beginning to read the book that comes with the game. And if you press next, the game still says, no really, go read it. Now imagine if you do the same thing repeatedly when you have all the room possible within your game, when you don't even give the players that book, that extra piece of narrative work along with the game. It gets annoying. And as confused and convoluted the way that Metal Gear Solid story was spaced out through various games and different platforms, at least those were still told within the context of a game. It didn't abruptly switch mediums, thereby diluting what the actual story was supposed to be, a part of a game. And I think I know why people do this. Well, there's two reasons why I think they do this. One, it's because Star Wars does it non-stop. Star Wars pulled the wool over everybody's eyes with the third movie, where you were expected to either have seen the cartoon, which was actually quite nice, the old one in the Samurai Jack style, or you were expected to have read the book that covers the events between the second and third movies of the prequel trilogy. And I say that it's because of Star Wars because one of the main studios that has done this in the past and sort of spearheaded this was BioWare. It wasn't alone. I'm gonna get to the others soon, but let's talk a bit about BioWare. The first time I noticed this was when playing the expansion to Dragon Age Origins. It featured characters, the villain, the architect, whatever his name was, that I was sort of expected to know about. What he is, what he does, what he's about, because there was a book about them. And that sort of took away from the experience of that expansion. I'm not even sure I finished it. Though the base game itself I did finish twice, both with a warrior and with a mage. Should probably do a show about it one day. A lot of conflict within that game and about it. And BioWare has continued the trend of diverging its storylines within books. Do you want to know about Mass Effect? Well, there's a billion books. Some of them were even so hastily put together that it does seem like they were written by Electronic Arts because they released patches for the books to correct errors. And again, I say that I noticed it first at BioWare because there was a relation with them working on Star Wars games. They were working on games based on the expanded content of the books, and that's where the idea may have come from. The other reason is money. I mean, why not? You have more content, easier to make content than a game, and people that have enjoyed your game will want to learn more about it, know more about it. And that's fine. Like, as an idea, as a concept, I find that to be absolutely fine. But when you make it mandatory, when you make it a requirement, that's not fine anymore, because you're not telling your story through the game. You're telling your story through something that isn't the game. I may as well just stick to the other materials, they're probably cheaper, and then watch a playthrough on YouTube or just the cutscenes on YouTube of the game and have, well, at this point, let's face it, it's the same experience. Would actually be kind of better. I mean, imagine going from Mass Effect 2 without the dull, annoying, repetitive combat. That would have been fantastic. And yeah, BioWare was not the only company to do this. Blizzard was kind of famous for doing it for a while. It started making all sorts of books based on its franchises a long time before BioWare did, but they were never really required reading, at least not for a very long time. They were just additions, fluff, stuff that you did not need to know to enjoy the games. Stuff that contradicts the games, actually. But as time went on, they veered more towards that content rather than the story that was in the games. Diablo is one of the main examples of this. It's been vamped and revamped so many times that the games themselves, apart from the third one, aren't aren't entirely canon, are they? Bits of what happens in them are contradicted constantly. The first one has been completely rewritten. And if you want to know the full story, well, there's the Book of Cain, which I actually own. I got it in a contest. That is basically a blueprint for the new story of Diablo, one that does contradict much of the previous games. Just like, for example, Diablo 2 had a bit of a strange situation that it had the battle.net-only events with stories and characters like Lilith. They were not mentioned in Diablo 1 at all, and in most of Diablo 2 at all. They just came up with her, like, out of the fly, out of the bloom, and bam, there's Lilith and Inarius, and that's how humans were born, and everybody's a Nephilim now, and that's why you're super duper stronger than other people. And it's annoying, you have to face it, it's an annoying tendency that publishers have. Why can't you at least, and I can't believe I'm defending this, put the books in the games? I have two minds about this as well. I kinda like how Elder Scrolls does it. The books there show you a glimpse, a slice of what the author, the in-world author, believed or wanted you to believe about events and characters and ideas. I like that. Something like the Codex, however, where everything that you ever pick up is stored in your inventory in a number with no substance to it, just a lore dump. The BioWare way, I mean. Not a big fan of. Especially since the Bethesda way, Ultima was doing it a really long time before Bethesda, and it was the same kind of idea. It was written from the perspective of a character in that game, not a plot dump, not a lore dump. Now there are reasons for why you can't have your story in the game. Let's say your game doesn't have one. Let's say it's Team Fortress 2. Well, then it makes sense that you would tell your story through comics and through cinematics that would be viewable outside of the game for free, because the main focus is still the game. Overwatch has the same problem. It sort of tries to... Actually, I'm not sure exactly what the deal is with Overwatch. What you're playing is supposed to be a simulation, I think. But since it's a simulation, how can it have a progression of a story? Whereas in Team Fortress, it's kind of clear. It's two opposing forces of clone mercenaries directed by some nut jobs, some cartoon villains, fighting against each other for no real reason at this point, just because somebody needs to get paid. It was meant to be ludicrous, it was meant to be strange and bizarre. And in the case of Left 4 Dead, it was supposed to give backstory, and I think there was also a comic about an event that happens between the teams of the first and second one. And it still kind of worked, because it was still very much tied to the game. They were all viewable freely on the web, on the main page of the game. They weren't in a bookstore separately, and they weren't actively contradicting what was happening in the game or require patches. Still, even BioWare's approach doesn't completely ruin the experience. Yeah, you miss out on details, you may not get some of the nuances, some of the ideas, but then you have disasters like Crysis 2. Never in that game do they ever mention what happened to the main character of Crysis. The first one, the one you played as. Apparently there's some comic or book out there where he got killed off, but he's never mentioned at all. The hell with investment in the character that you played as for many hours. They just shoved him in the comic and had him eat a missile to save his friends. Because nobody sure would have wanted to see that in a game, though. Why would they? Goddamn Crysis. Should probably do a show about Crysis 2 as well. Hated that game. My god, it was atrocious. I think I actually did in the top 7 games ending into that everybody likes and I don't. I'm curious to know what your opinion on the subject of moving a game story out of the game is. Am I just being a divisive busybody with nothing better to do than to complain that people write books about games? I mean, I've written fanfiction myself. I've even sent some to Blizzard, though the contest wasn't technically available for people in my country because of reasons. But at the same time, I never claimed that my fanfiction was the true lore of the game. And I kind of always want to see the games as like tier 1 in terms of what is true. Going back to Star Wars again, it's the same thing. The movies are what is true. Step down is the TV series, I believe. So the Christmas special is canon, I think. Then there's cartoons, which don't know, those are TV series too. But then there's books, and then come the games. Like, this is the order of priority. If something is contradicted in any of them, the one with the highest priority is always true. In games, it's the other way around, it seems, or it's basically however the publisher decides it wants things to go, or maybe the developer actually does have a hand in it at some point, and they don't revamp characters and plot lines just because something tested better with a focus audience, like what happens to movies usually, I mean. So make sure to mention something in the comments, or just rant about how everything relating to Star Wars now is purely fan fiction, and that the only movies that mattered ended over 30 years ago. Goodbye.